that. So let's get started. I'm conscious about time, and Helen's got so much to go through with you. So, as I said, thank you so much for joining us this morning. For those of you who don't know, my name is Kayleen Harrington, and I recently joined the Norfolk Chamber of Commerce as their event manager. So, as you can imagine, we've chucked our event calendar out of the window and started a brand new virtual one. So I really hope you're enjoying what we're currently offering. So yeah, remote working has become far more common during the pandemic. There are hints that working completely or mostly from home will become the new normal in some organisations. Workers are trying to establish what this means to them on an individual basis. For example, around motivation and work-life balance. Managers have a role to play in helping them find a balance that works for both workers and the business. In this free to attend 60-minute webinar, Dr. Helen Fitzhugh, Senior Research Associate and Knowledge Exchange Fellow. Wow, that's a long job title, Helen.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
At the University of East Anglia, will share with you a handy management checklist focused on improving the well-being and productivity of your workforce. You're welcome to submit questions during the presentations, but these will be answered during the live Q&A afterwards. So please use the Q&A function when you have a question. We'll also be using the chat and poll functions, so you're in for a very interactive webinar. So before I hand it over to Helen, just to let you know that I'm now going to be chasing anyone that's slightly late. So if you see my head go like this, it's because I'm doing the background sort of admin stuff. So I'm not being rude and not listening. I promise I am doing my job. So yeah, Helen, over to you.
Thank you so much for that enthusiastic introduction and a brilliant start to a Monday morning. So we'll hopefully have a bit of energy in this session, and I'm going to share my screen, pop some slides up, and we'll go through what we're going to talk about today. So just bear with me while I'm getting the slides. Okay. So that should now be showing the slides. And I just wanted to welcome everyone in today. We're going to be talking about managing remote work. And I'm really happy that we're doing a collaboration between our Norwich Business School at the University of East Anglia, Norfolk Chambers of Commerce and the Propel Hub. So we've got a lot of people involved today, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we're doing that. But first of all, I thought I would introduce myself to you, so you know who's speaking. So, who I am and why I'm here. So I'm Helen. As Kayleen said, I have got a very long job title, but essentially, being a knowledge exchange fellow just means that I have my feet in two worlds. So I do research on workplace wellbeing with academics at the university. And then I also try to bring those insights out to businesses and organisations so they can make use of them. So hopefully what I'm doing, I'd like to think I is being a conduit between cutting edge research and people who can use that research in their workplaces to improve the well-being of employees, and in doing so, improve performance and productivity as well. One of the reasons why I'm able to do this at the moment is because we have a collaboration between Norwich Business School and the Propel Hub, which is an initiative across the UK universities and the CIPD to do just what I just said, so the knowledge exchange element. And we're going to tell you the website of the Propel Hub throughout the presentation and in our follow-up email. And you can also contact me if you're interested in what we're doing. I've put my email address there, but I'm also contactable via Twitter. It's a brave new world for me, but I'm getting used to it. And what we're going to be doing over the course of a number of years is not only doing this kind of webinar and talk, producing blogs, producing resources. We'll also be working in the spring onwards, either one-to-one or in small groups with business practitioners. So if you'd like to be involved in that, please do sign up to the Propel Hub newsletter or contact me directly to see what the opportunities are. So today, I'll show you those links, but basically those are there so that when we send you the PDF, you can follow those links and see what the evidence is. So today what I'm going to be doing is some polls with you. So we're going to do some quick polls to find out who's in the room and what their experience is of what we're talking about. Then I'm going to talk you through how we came to make the checklist about managing remote work. Then we'll run through the sections of the checklist and I'll talk you through some of the reasons why the items are there. I'll ask you to set an intention. So after hearing what I've been talking about, what would you do differently in your workplace? Then we'll do a quick takeaway slide, what you want to remember going from this. And as Kaylin said, the live Q&A, where I will happily take questions and hang around afterwards as well if people want to ask more questions. So let's crack on with these polls. So usually when I do this kind of event, I'm at the front of a room, I'm very excited, I'm charging around all over the place, being happy to have so many people around. And I've usually said hello to everyone. And what do you do? So it'd just be really lovely to find out who's in the virtual room. And if you can answer the poll, we'll give people a few minutes to do so. Just gives me an idea of who I'm speaking to. And if you would like to, please feel free to expand on your answer in the chat, as it's obviously quite hard to cover all possibilities in a short poll. Looks like we've got some good amount of human resources, occupational health or wellbeing professionals in the room. Quite a few managers and leaders, and a few of my academic friends as well, which is lovely. So you're all very welcome. Oh, I think we're getting a good number of responses here. So we've got 31 of 40. We'll give it till a minute and then we'll close that down. So yeah, I think we're finished with the poll now, Kaylin, thank you. That should show the results shortly. Yep, lovely. So you can see the results if you'd like to. And it's just really helpful to know who's around. So we've got lots of people who are very interested in this topic, which is wonderful. Okay. Then we've got, so we'll move on to the next poll. Going to make sure I can move my slides. There we go. So this is what is your experience of managing workers remotely? That's the key topic we're talking about today. And I'm just interested to hear if you have extensive experience, some experience, very little prior to COVID-19. I mean, everyone's been through a bit of a baptism of fire with all of this, but or no experience and you're just interested. So we're going to do that one shortly. Great. Yeah, so as I thought, very little experience prior to COVID-19 restrictions, but doing it now. And just give yourself all a pat on the back for adapting so quickly, because it has been obviously quite a strange time. And we've got some people in the room who've done quite a bit of it before, and people with no experience, and that's fine, because essentially what we're going to do now is the checklist I'm going to go through is very easy to use, goes from basics through to something that's slightly more advanced, and hopefully it will benefit all of you. If you've got extensive experience, it's a recap, and if you've got very little experience or no experience, this will help you get a framework for thinking about how to go about managing. So that's great, thank you. Just move on to my next slide. So why have I made a checklist on managing remotely? Well, there's two key reasons. The first is that we know for workplace wellbeing that good management is absolutely vital. In other talks that I've been doing and will be doing in the future, I talk about 5 ways to workplace wellbeing, and that's based on extensive research by my colleagues at Norwich Business School for the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, which was one of the links I showed you earlier. So for that project, they did a lot of systematic reviews, which is looking at all the academic research that's out there, bringing it all together in one place and synthesizing the results. And what they realized was that in order to do workplace wellbeing well, there are 5 elements, which are raising awareness of workplace wellbeing opportunities and needs, helping people who are struggling, either with illness or with performance, building good relationships between co-workers and managers, good management, which is the one we're talking about now, and then looking to high quality jobs, so the features, the terms and conditions of jobs. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail now because I've covered them in other places, and I'm going to do so again in future events that I'll tell you about. But just to say that with all this evidence that we've produced about what's useful for workplace wellbeing, good management is absolutely key. And I'm sure you will all know that from having had experience of either excellent managers who you've thrived under or managers who haven't necessarily helped you in your workplace. And we can always bring a couple of those to mind as well. So it's a good reminder, good management is vital. The other reason why it's important now to look at managing remotely is because many people have been faced with managing remote workers for the first time in the COVID-19 pandemic. I've got a figure here, which is previous to the COVID-19 pandemic, 3% of employees always worked from home. And then in the first month of the lockdown, 44% of employees were always working from home. Now, obviously, that will have evened out a little bit now. But think about the massive jump that represented, people having completely new experiences of both working remotely and managing remotely. And there are lots of figures on that in an article by Professor Alan Felsted, who's one of our Propel Hub colleagues, and you can find that on the Propel Hub's website as well. But I just wanted to put that figure in there because it was quite a stark reminder that people are having to do things differently. And that's why I thought it would be useful to make a checklist to help them do so. So initially, when lockdown happened, my colleagues and I at the Norwich Business School, who have this specialism in workplace wellbeing, wanted to do something that would help people immediately. So in the first months of lockdown, we produced an infographic. And that is available on the What Works Wellbeing Centre website. So you don't have to screenshot this. You can download the full big PDF from there. But it was an attempt to distill some of this learning from all these systematic reviews and pieces of research on workplace wellbeing into one place so that people could have a look at it and know what they might need to think of when they were managing remote workers for the first time. And the hook behind this was, we need to build good habits now, and it won't be a waste, because even if you take those habits back to the office, they're the habits that underpin good management in general. So although you might have to do it differently because you're using a computer, you're doing it via a video connection, actually it's the same principles whatever you're doing. So by learning those now, because you're worried about managing remotely, when you take those skills back to the office, they will also improve your management there. So I've said we've worked a lot with the stuff we've done for What Works Wellbeing, but there are also some other sources which I built this checklist on. So I did some reading of some previous work by some colleagues, Kevin Daniels and Rachel Nyani, which were findings from research on the management of distributed workers. So distributed workers aren't necessarily remote, they're just far from their manager. But we had some good evidence on what you needed to do to help support them. Then we also looked at findings from a systematic review of reviews on the wellbeing and productivity challenges of isolated and confined working. So I did this one with my colleague Kevin at the start of the UK lockdown, learning from kind of jobs that have always been isolated and confined, like Arctic workers and people who are nurses in rural areas who aren't necessarily supported in the same way. So we wanted to see what those challenges were and how you could mitigate them. We also did some really lovely work with Cambridgeshire Constabulary over the summer on distributed and agile working. So we put some of the guidance for this comes from research that's not yet published there. And then once I'd created the checklist, I gathered comments and feedback from a range of professionals in the Eastern Region Wellbeing Task Force. So these are large and small businesses that have a really strong interest in wellbeing. You might be asking, okay, so you've made your infographic and you've got all this evidence. Why make a checklist? You know, you could have just written a blog, you could have just done this webinar. What's so important about a checklist? Well, a long time ago, I read a book by a doctor called Atul Gawande, and it's called The Checklist Manifesto. He made a really compelling argument in that book that checklists help us in ways that other information sources don't. Because what they do is they set out the bare bones of what you need to think about to get from A to B in a very clear, very simple manner. What he did in his book was explain a process to make a World Health Organization surgical safety checklist. So around the world in surgery, lots of people unfortunately suffer complications and some of those die. And what he wanted to do was not produce some amazing bit of equipment or get a new drug that would help reduce mortality, but just get the really simple things reminded to surgical staff before they started doing surgery, so that if complications arose, they could deal with them. So you can see here, you can Google this on the net, but basically it's an A4 side which says what you do before anesthesia, before skin incision, etc. And even though these are incredibly talented, clever, wonderful, genius people, you know, people who've done a masses of training to become surgeons and nurses and really skilled at what they do, we know that under complex conditions, and if people are under pressure, they can forget things. It's nothing to do with their quality as you know, a professional. That's just human nature. So the checklist, it doesn't take away your professional autonomy. It doesn't make you have to just do things in a tick box fashion. What it does is it acts as an aid memoir, a reminder of what you might need to do. So even very, very clever people who are really fantastic at their job can have a quick flick over a checklist just to check that in this particular complex situation under pressure, they've done what they need to do. And we find that that's what happens in industries that need high safety. So aviation, construction, oil and gas, they all use checklists to work through tasks that keep people safe. And so what I've tried to do is produce you something that's not supposed to take away your autonomy as a professional. It's just supposed to underpin it. It's to say, oh, just check this and we'll see if I need to do anything that I've forgotten about because it's been a quite pressured, complex time. So let's get into the details of what this checklist looks like. Working conditions. We've got a number of sections here: physical circumstances, equipment and technology, and managing the homework boundary. And these are kind of your basic underlying considerations, both when you've got people who are working remotely for the first time. It's especially important to consider these questions, but also for people who may have been remote working now for 6 months. You know, people adapt and people make do, and we don't always know that that's what they're doing. So while these might be things that you think, oh yes, I might have checked those out at the start when people started remote working, it's always good to check in and see what's important with people again. So key considerations are, is the remote worker safe? And that seems like such a silly fundamental question, but actually we know that in society at the moment there are massive inequalities of housing and appropriate areas. So people who you think might be okay, you know, might be working in a situation which isn't either safe or their basic needs aren't met. Like at the moment, it's a really cold day. Are people working in a temperature that means that they can work? And have they got suitable light to do so? And then there's a consideration that's slightly different to that, in that can they work privately and keep data confidential if necessary? We all know how big a thing data protection has become, rightly so. And is it possible for that person to work privately and keep that data confidential? So that's the physical circumstances block. Then we've got equipment and technology. So this is really interesting. Like the research I did over the summer, when you're asking people about their workstations during the pandemic, that there've been so many improvised workstations. There's been people working on ironing boards. You know, there's been people who are at who started off trying to work at breakfast bars on high stools, and then 2 weeks later realized they'd got a cricked back and couldn't do anything about it. So the other thing is that I've had people talk to me about their workstations during this time and say things like, well, it's in my home, so I don't want lots of big screens and big boxes and big things I can't move. I'm happy with my laptop, which you might think, okay, well, that's their choice. But if you're going to work at a laptop for a long time, you may get musculoskeletal problems. And, you know, has there been a risk assessment of the suitability of various things that people are using? So I would say that's something that's, with all of these things, these aren't kind of, you have to run through these like this, just 1, 2, 3, let's do these tick boxes. It's more keeping an eye on things, asking people questions while you're talking to them in a dialogue, just so that you can make sure that people have everything they need to do their job in a safe way and in a way that will help their performance and productivity for you as well. So do they have access to the tools, software, databases they need? And are reasonable adjustments in place for workers with a disability? So people might have reasonable adjustments in their office workspace, but have you been able to apply those to their home workspace as well? And then managing the home-work boundary. This is something that when I was doing the research on isolated and confined workers, particularly healthcare workers in kind of the Australian outback, was they found it really hard to manage the homework boundary because people thought they could be contacted at any hour because they were at home even though they were working. And I think we've got some of that now going on in some businesses where, because people are always near their laptop or near their phone, you know, they might be contacted in hours that aren't necessarily suitable for their home life or for their rest and relaxation. So it's just saying, have you discussed and agreed working and contactable hours with your employees, the people you're managing? And have you offered the opportunity to supportively discuss any homework boundary issues? And I know lots of managers have been doing this really well, not in an intrusive way, not in a kind of, you must tell me everything about your home life way, but just, is there anything we can do to help support that in a better way? So like I say there, vital considerations that kind of underpin everything else, not for new workers, but checking in with your existing. Second slide here, this is the middle part of the checklist, and it's about working relationships. And as we know from what I told you earlier, working relationships and building good connections is one of the key things that we need to build workplace well-being. And it's a hard time right now. You know, if you have got lots of people who are interacting either via video calls like this, or even aren't using the video and are just using phones or just voice calls, it can be hard to make sure that those connections are kept up. So in a sense, we're working harder now to do this, but the principles are exactly the same as if you had someone in an office or a factory, or if you were managing. So the first thing is obviously supportive management. Have you made time for regular contact? And I know for everyone, regular contact will be different depending on the type of work and the worker's experience. But, you know, with speaking with our task force and speaking with other people, there's a huge variety in what people think regular is and what it means. But for me, it means, have you got enough time to give them the work guidance they need, the feedback they need, facilitate any development and training they might need, and signpost to support if they're struggling? If you haven't made regular enough time to do that, then it's time to think about how to schedule that in a kind of more consistent way. Then we've got contact with co-workers. Now, I know that a lot of this is, you'll say, well, it's up to co-workers to make sure they speak to other people in their team, and have, obviously personal responsibility is really important here. But as a manager, there are things you can do to offer workers ways to connect with each other and to encourage or facilitate any virtual social sessions. If you've got new employees, it really is a good idea to find some way to help them just get to know the people who they'll be working with, because we know that in remote sessions, often you can get straight to the nub of what you're talking about much quicker than if you were all in a room, getting a cup of tea, having 5 minutes before you've all sat down. In a way, it's almost like virtually facilitating that process of all arriving in a room, a bit like Kayleen did today, which was lovely. Making sure that we're all kind of familiar with each other, and so that once you're talking about work, you have an idea who you're talking to. And these things are really important to people, just to make them feel connected, and that they know and can build trust with those they're working with. And then we've got the last section there, feeling valued and collective purpose. If you're on the end of a screen and that's the only contact you're having with co-workers, it can feel very isolating. And also, if your work is not necessarily, let's say, the core work of an organisation, if you are a person who's not on the front line doing something direct with the public, but you're doing one of the support facilities, which are all really important, it might be that you feel very disconnected from everything. So managers who are praising aspects of people's work and making it clear how their work feeds into the wider success of the organisation will help keep that connection a little bit more alive, even though people aren't able to see and interact with the building or the place where their main work goes on. So I would say those are the kind of core activities in fostering, encouraging working relationships and keeping those going. And then we have the third row of the checklist, and this is about opportunities. One thing that I find interesting about this column is sometimes if I talk about opportunities, people ask if it's somewhat of a middle class concern. Am I saying that there should be this sort of aspiration for everyone to kind of develop and do lots of training and kind of pursue that kind of aspirational approach? And I just want to be clear that that's not actually what I'm talking about when I talk about opportunities. That's a small part of it. But the really key thing, I mean, is fairness and dialogue. So fair allocation of workload and benefits applies to everyone, not just white collar workers. If you've got a mix of people who are working from home and people who are working on a site, have you actively reviewed how you allocate workload and development opportunities to them to make sure it doesn't mean that either people who are visible on site are getting more opportunities to do things, or getting a particular type of work that they like more, and people at home are getting more admin? There are all sorts of things that happen when you've got two different bodies of people who you're managing, and one of them gets more time with their managers than others. So fairness and procedural justice, which is just doing things fairly, are really important. And one way of knowing if you're dealing with that is discussing things with people. So have you discussed and dealt with any fairness queries from workers? So opportunities is not just about training and networking, although we will get onto that. I just want to reiterate fairness, fair allocation, workload, leave, and all sorts of things that people might worry about if some of them are in different situations to others. Then we go on to appropriate feedback and appraisal, and the need for constructive feedback. So this is also an opportunity, because people who are offered constructive feedback are able to change how they're doing and perhaps perform better in a way that people who aren't offered constructive feedback aren't. So it's still an opportunity that you can offer people, and it also means that you know, you're managing performance. And I know that a lot of managers have been really concerned about performance when they can't see people and see how things are going, look over their shoulder or be there a bit more often. So one of the ways to do that is to look at the outputs, offer constructive feedback, and then again have that dialogue with workers in a very determined and intentional way. I think in the office what we had was a lot of ad hoc informal management, and that can really have its benefits in making things not feel too stuffy, not feel too formal. But if you go to ad hoc only in a virtual setting, a lot of things can be lost, because in a sense it is slightly formalizing what you're doing via the channel. You have to make an appointment to do things, you have to ask people in a more kind of intentional way what's going on with them. And if you have a little look at the bottom checkpoint on appropriate feedback and appraisal, I've put, have you sought worker feedback to help you learn as a remote manager? So this is something which goes back to my time when I wasn't sitting at a video screen and doing this kind of talk. I was going out to see people in factories and other workplaces. And I remember going to one particular place, a fabulous manager who I really liked, who was trying to do things to improve worker well-being, really enthusiastic, and said, but the trouble is the workers don't want to do the things. I put in something lovely for well-being and not many people turn up. And I just casually said, oh, what did they say when you asked them, you know, why they weren't interested in it? And he said, oh, you know, actually asking people what's going on with them and what they like and what they don't want is really important, and you can do that. And I think that it was really odd when we had that conversation, because he said, I never asked them why they didn't turn up. I never asked them why they didn't want to do what I thought would be wonderful for well-being. And I said, well, that might be the first step, is just to go out onto the factory floor and say, oh, we put this on. Do you think it sounds good? Do you think it doesn't sound good? And kind of work in that way. And I know it sounds really simplistic to say you need to talk to people, but in essence, if we go back to the five things that underpin workplace wellbeing, so much of it is about communication and having those conversations, helping people if they're struggling, fostering good relationships between co-workers, fostering good relationships between manager and team member, and then letting people know about opportunities that are available to them. So then at the bottom box on this checklist before you, we have opportunities to learn and network. So this is checking on work-related training and networking needs, and showing a commitment to people's longer term development needs and goals. And that one's in there because we know that if you are interacting with your workers in ways that show them that you treat them as a person, as a whole person who might want to be trained or develop or meet other people to advance what they're doing, that can be really helpful, rather than only interacting with them clearly on the specific tasks you need them to do. So if you broaden that sense of treating them as a person, part of that is looking at their longer term development needs and goals. And what I've done in the checklist is order those. So I'm going to show you the checklist now, but be aware that you don't have to screenshot this. We're going to send you the link. You can download it from the Propel Hub website in the proper high resolution version. So, but I'll show you what it looks like now. So we have a checklist for the proactive management of remote workers. On the left-hand side, we have working conditions. So these are the vital considerations for new remote workers and to check back on. Then we have in the middle working relationships. That's your core. That's why it's at the middle, core activities of remote management. And then at the right-hand side, we've got opportunities, and that's what helps underpin the well-being and performance of your workforce in the longer term. So that's me been talking a very long time. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to keep this up, but ask you a question. So the question is, which checkbox action would you like to act on this month? And I'm asking this because we've seen previously that if we help people think about which thing they might like to do based on the evidence we've presented, if you think about it now, you're more likely to do it when you go away, rather than if I just say, I'll present you all the information and you can go away and think about it. And also, it's just really interesting to hear people's reflections on which bits of the checklist might be most useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that up, but what I'd like you to do is in the chat, write down if there's a checkbox point that you find particularly that you want to act upon. I won't actually be able to see the chat while I've got this up, but I'll rely on Kayleen to tell me if people are doing it and if they need further encouragement. But yeah, feel free to say what your intention is, which one of those things you might work on. And I've also said which one. You can say lots, but remember that if this is looking overwhelming, there's a lot to do here if you're very new or haven't got experience. You can always just start at the beginning and work your way through. You know, one of the things we always forget when we're new to something is you can do it incrementally, step by step, and by the time you've worked through everything, you'll have got to a really good place. But it doesn't all have to be done at this exact moment. Everyone will be at different places in this.
So we've had quite a few responses. So Nikia says, we find one of the blockers is that staff don't want to move with the needs of the business by learning new ways of doing this, as they were confident doing what they did before and want to keep doing that. They are resistant to change even when we ask them for input ideas. How do we mitigate this? But I'll ask you that in the Q&A later.
Yeah, great.
Catherine then says workplace relationships. Richard Oliver says managing the home/work boundary. Andy says working conditions. Claire says working relationships. Gemma says contact with co-workers. Ben says feedback from workers to help me learn. Alex says physical circumstances, appropriate working space. Beth says contact with co-workings, particularly for new staff members. Aisha says for our managers, probably focusing on working relationships, in particular the informal social aspect is probably getting missed in the whole focus on the day-to-day. Jean says contact with co-workers. I'm just seeing, okay, there's two more. Janine says, I'll be looking at feeling valid/collective purpose, as we are not all together in the office to feel part of the team in the same way. And then Sophie says, encouraging contact with co-workers. We will be arranging virtual coffee mornings where staff can connect on Zoom and have a non-work related catch up to recreate the morning catch-ups over coffee. Yeah,
sounds good. We've had some of those with my team as well. We've had coffee afternoon as a middle coffee morning, but and it's been really nice just to get to know people in a different way, especially people who are newer into their roles or have started during this time and have never met their co-workers face to face. So thank you all for that, and very happy to pick up the questions shortly. And continue to put in any other points that you'd like to over the course of this. But what I'll do now is I'll just move to the slide with the takeaways on it. They've gone. There we are. So based on the evidence, we know what managing well looks like. We've got that from previous research, from systematic reviews and field research and organisations. So if you try and apply the principles that we've talked about here, learning to manage well remotely, that can make you a better manager overall. It's not lost It's not any other situation. Looking at working conditions, looking at working relationships and opportunities will give you a good framework overall, using the evidence base to improve well-being and productivity in your organisation. Then there's the idea of balance. So we're not looking to either neglect or overly control. And I know that there have been a lot of scary things in the news, especially when the pandemic first hit, about people really wanting to monitor their employees at in sort of weird technological ways. But what we know from the wellbeing research and the productivity research is that autonomy, or having the freedom or choice or discretion to do what you need to do to get your job done, is part of what makes people feel that they have a better job. And then also, if they have greater well-being, means that they can perform better. So being aware of that need for autonomy and discretion, and allowing it to the extent that is suitable for the worker's experience and the type of work, is important. So if you find yourself tipping too far towards neglect, i.e. you haven't spoken to any of your workers for a while because you've been really busy doing something else, or towards excessive control, wanting to know what they're doing every minute, just on what might be helpful and supportive rather than overly micromanaging. Then we've got no one size fits all, so tailoring is necessary. There are people who we've spoken to in our research over the summer who have got vastly different situations. So I can think of two examples. So one is a lady who has her children have grown up, gone to university. She's got a 4-bedroom house. She's got an office. She sits in the office and does her work at a table with a lovely big screen, and does all of those things, and feels quite happy working from home, has been doing her job a long time, doesn't need a lot of supervision. And then I can think of a chap who was at home with children, and what happens is we've had to homeschool these children, and at the same time I've got this job, which means I sometimes have to go into work during the day and then come back and work remotely during the night, and was essentially up 20 hours a day for that early lockdown period. And you can see that it's such a different experience, that understanding a little bit about what people are going through will help you understand their well-being and their productivity requirements. So talk to people. And I know I take the point absolutely that the question we've just had, and I will address it, but it doesn't make me go back on this idea of talking to people. And that can be done in various different ways. But if you are struggling with feedback via more formal means, so if you're, for instance, asking people things via a survey, or asking people in a kind of structured group session, say, oh, if anyone's got any problems, get back to me, but there's 20 people in the room and they don't really want to talk about their problems in front of others, it might be worth looking to the ad hoc and the informal slightly more. But talking to people is really important. So those are my takeaways. And then I just want to say thank you very much for listening. I know it's quite hard when we're on a virtual, and I can't get eye contact with you all and respond to any requests immediately. But what we've got now is we've got the chance for the Q&A. So hopefully I'll be able to do a little bit of that now. And I really look forward to hearing your impressions and what you want to know more about.
Thank you, Helen. So we've got a question from Alex saying, is there a risk assessment resource, maybe a checklist for people's home workstations?
So I think it's essentially the same things apply as the normal, I can't remember, is it DSE? I'm not someone who does health and safety as much, but there is a like a health and safety executive checklist for workstations. Hopefully one of you in the room will be able to tell me what the formal name for that is, because I don't have to administer it myself, so I'm not sure. But yes, basically there is, yeah, DSE, there we go. Thank you. Essentially, we're not making concessions really for people being at home. The workstation needs to be as the workstation needs to be. And yeah, lots of people in their HR department have checklists. I know that I've been through some for the university, and it's just to help support so that people are, aware of musculoskeletal issues and that kind of thing, because with mental health and musculoskeletal issues being the massive things that keep people off work or reduce performance, we really need to take both in hand and consider them during this time.
Thank you. Also, if you are a Norfolk Chamber member, you'll have access to these health and safety checklists as well. If you're unsure, then pop me an email and I can get your account manager to help you. So we've also got, so I've got a question. So this has all been about managing remote workers. Is there anything different that needs to be done when you have a mixture of both remote and office-based staff?
Yeah, so I think this question goes back to that idea of fairness I was talking about. So in a sense, the principles that underlie good management in any situation are the same, but it's how you apply them. So if you've got a mix of people, it's being aware that there may be some tensions or misapprehensions even between those who are working from home and those who are working in the office or the factory or wherever your workspace is. And in a sense, addressing social contact between your workers is one way of addressing this, because if they will make up stories in their own head of what's going on with the other people if they don't get to talk to them and if they don't know about what's going on with them. So I can think of one example in the research we did where someone said people were making jokes about, over the hot summer, people working from home sitting with their feet in a paddling pool having a lovely time, whilst all those poor people who had to go into the office slaved away. And I think the thing was, if they'd have known that that person was really struggling and suffering with home working and homeschooling and working crazy hours, they wouldn't have made that joke, because they would have realized that person would be sensitive to the fact that it sounded like they were saying they were goofing off. So in a sense, keeping that connection going, keeping the working relationships going, will hopefully mean that between office workers and people who are working from home, there's more understanding of what's going on between them, rather than this blanket, oh, well, you've got it better because you get to go into work and we have to stay here, or you've got it better because you get to stay at home and we've got to come here.
Thank you. So just to remind people, if you've got any questions, feel free to either pop them in the Q&A function or the chat. So we've got a couple more questions. So Nikki, which I vaguely mentioned earlier, we find one of the blockers is that staff don't want to move with the needs of the business by learning new ways of doing things, as they're confident doing what they did before and want to keep doing the same. They're resistant to change even when we ask them for input/ideas. How do we mitigate this? Yeah,
I mean, people are the most difficult thing. I'm not saying that they aren't. There is no magic wand with people, but in a sense, one of the things that happens when people are resistant to change is they fear something, and people fear something when things are uncertain and there's less trust or kind of strong relationships. So I keep coming back to talking about it, but if there's something that people are worried about in the change, if we do this change, maybe we'll put ourselves out of a job. If we do this change, maybe I'll look incompetent, or I will be harshly judged by others. So if you go back to thinking, are you aware what the fears are that are being evoked by this change that you're trying to produce? And is there any way you can address them as a manager by offering support or feedback? So for instance, I've had to move online and do my engagement sessions on Zoom. And it was incredibly terrifying to broadcast to 100 people live when you've never done it before earlier in the year. But I have managers who basically said, okay, well, obviously we'd love it if it goes well, but if there's anything that happens, it's something you're new at, something will probably go wrong. You'll learn. it'll you know, we'll be able to move on from it. And in essence, feeling that you won't be kind of castigated or really kind of be harshly judged if you're doing something absolutely new to you that you're really worried about, can be quite helpful. But like I say, these are all minor things about keeping up communication, building relationships, building trust, having those informal conversations, and getting beneath things, which I'm sure people are trying to do already. And then there's the point at which people are intractable. So, you know, I think it's recognizing both. There's always something you can do, but you can't do absolutely everything to change everyone's mind all the time. And being somewhere in between, I'm all for balance. So we're not at the pessimistic, can't do anything about it stage, but not at the I can change the absolute everything if I just learn, you know, how to do it. We're somewhere in the middle with dealing with people all the time.
Thank you. What I'm also going to do for Nikki and anyone else is I've just popped in the chat function. We delivered a really interesting event on motivational maps with Turning Factor, which basically helps you identify where people are. So kind of like a Myers-Briggs, but a more up-to-date version. So when you're trying to communicate change, if you can identify where the staff member falls, you'll then be able to deliver it in a way that should hopefully freak them out less, and they should be more on board. So I've just popped the link to the recording, so feel free to watch it. And I know that Turning Factor will happily run any workshops for you, answer any questions you have. But again, I think that one would really help whenever you're trying to deliver any sort of changes, or if you're meeting any sort of resistance, that might help you understand the reason why. So I love it. We've got loads more questions. Now, I'm really sorry, I might pronounce this name wrong, and if I do, I apologise. I think it's Marika, but I could be wrong. It's difficult for us to manage workload remotely because we don't have a clear idea on how long people are spending on tasks. What are your thoughts on software that monitors activity?
Yeah. So I'm not a fan. But I know that it will depend on the work that you're doing as well. So I think any kind of monitoring, I think one of the things to do is just really be aware of what feelings it will create in the people who are being monitored. So will it help support your relationship with them, which hopefully would be a relationship where they can trust you and you can trust them, and they have some element of autonomy and discretion about how they do their work? Or will it make them fearful and concerned, which would then impact on their well-being and then impact on their productivity? So it might be counterproductive. So I don't know the work you do, and it might be that it's appropriate and everyone would find it helpful. But at the same time, I think the key consideration there is, what would it do to the relationships between you and the people you manage? And is there a way you could do that differently? So is there a way where you could ask people to, for instance, consider how long things are taking and report back to you? So it's like everyone this week will be thinking about how long things are taking, and then we'll have a group discussion about how long things are taking. And then we don't monitor them the rest of the time because we've kind of had that discussion and we know about it. So there might be different ways of doing it, is all I'm saying. And tailoring it to your workers and to your work will be really important, keeping those principles in mind.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Laurie. Hi, Helen. Have you seen any particular sectors, organisations or cultures where managing remote working is done well / better than other areas? And if so, why is this?
That's interesting. So I think that there were organisations which previously had a lot of what I called, right at the start of this, I called distributed workers. So they weren't necessarily remote in the sense that we've been talking about office workers being remote. They were people who have got to manage others all over the globe, that kind of thing. And I think people who have had some experience of remote working before and of managing remote workers have found it easier. But I couldn't point to a particular sector, I would say. It's more on an individual basis. If people, the other thing, actually, I've just remembered from the original research about distributed workers was if you have been a distributed worker yourself and been managed remotely, you have more of an understanding of what you need from your manager and therefore what you are going to give to your employees. So having some sense of what your employees going through helps you manage them. And I think that came out in the original research that my colleagues Rachel and Kevin did. So, oh, that's great. I've just seen in the chat that Norfolk County Council has done an amazing job on this. I'm glad to hear it. That's excellent. And I'd love to talk to you about it, because I'm trying to gather at the moment insights into how people are applying all of this. So that's really good news.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah,
There is
absolutely.
one question for Ben, but what I'll do, Helen, is I'll send it to you. You can answer it, and then we can put it in the post-event email if that's all right.
Sure.
The one from Sammy, I think, is more health and safety related, which isn't your area of expertise. But again, Sammy, if you're a member, you can find that out via Quest. Or a good Google search. Helen, I know you had some other stuff before you wanted to close.
Yeah, just the one slide. I'll just get it up again. So just a mo. So just to finish, thank you for joining us today. I hope it was useful to you, and please do pop anything in the chat in that regard. Also, we've got a quick feedback link, electronic form. It's only a few questions, and I would really love it if people could answer that, because we can only carry on doing this as long as we have proof it's useful. So my work, as I said before, is trying to be this conduit between cutting edge research and people out there in organisations. And if you're finding it useful, I can make the case to carry on doing that work. So please do answer our feedback link, which is, I think Kayleen's popped it in the chat, and also it will be in the follow-up email, and it will take very little time at all. Also, there are more events you can take part in with me and Norfolk Chamber. So we're going to have a very small intimate workshop to follow up on this on the 22nd of January. We're only taking, I think, 10 or 12 people, and it will be reserved for people in this webinar. So if you'd like to talk to me a little bit more about what we've covered in this checklist, or ask me questions about the research, work through with others, what remote management looks like, that's what we'll do at that workshop. So I know Kayleen's going to send that link out to you in the follow-up email as well. Then I've got another webinar in February called the Spangle Trap, and that will be all about implementing workplace wellbeing strategies. So we know I've talked to you today about the 5 things you can do to improve workplace wellbeing, but how do you actually go about the nuts and bolts of that? So that one will be in February, and I think that link is already up, and that will come out to you in your follow-up email. And we'll have a similar size 10 to 12 person workshop to follow it up. Then finally, because of my work for the Propel Hub, there are going to be opportunities to interact one-to-one or in small groups with people from organisations in the spring. And I haven't got a clear idea so far how I'm going to do these. I'm open to suggestions. I'm also open to topics. Obviously, I focus on workplace wellbeing, so I can't really stray outside that topic. But within that topic, is there anything people want to know or talk about? So you'll have my email address. If there's anything you think we should be finding out academic research on and feeding back to you, please do email me, or you can engage with me on Twitter. I'm at Dr. Fitzhugh, and that's on the first slide as well, which will be sent out to you in the follow-up email. So hopefully we'll see some of you at some of those things in the future. I'll stop sharing now. And I just want to say, yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Helen. Sorry again that we're slightly over, but just wanted to provide you with all that information. As we said, I will include all the links and the presentation in the post-event email shortly. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us on this Monday morning. I hope you found it as insightful as I did, and I'm kind of raring to go for the week now. Beforehand, I was a bit tired and a bit of a zombie, hadn't quite, got a bit of a Monday morning feeling. So yeah, I hope you're now feeling revved up and raring to go for the week ahead. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. See you later.
Thanks. Bye-bye.